So welcome to today's episode. It seems an age since I did an actual book review, which is what most of my channel is about. But after the pleasant distractions of discussion and tag videos, I'm returning with a book review. The Spaceman of Bohemia by Jaroslav Kalfar. Apologies for any mispronunciation. I've mentioned before, in one respect, before I'd even received this book, it was very unusual because it was published in March 2017, presumably in hardback. But I ordered it soon after, and have waited 8 months for the paperback to arrive. And I've never ordered a book so far in advance. And I was trying to rack my brains. What was it about the blurb or whatever that so attracted me to the book? And couldn't remember, of course. It can't have been the title because I have a sort of ambivalent attitude towards man's space exploration. Real life, I'm not interested in it at all because to me it's fundamentally linked with sort of military sort of development and expenditure, and in the 80s that had its apotheosis with Ronald Reagan's Star Wars sort of idea that the US would have sort of satellite fired missiles from beyond the Earth back onto Earth. So I've never been sort of taken with space exploration in real life. But when I think about it in literature, lots of my favourite books involve this. So there's Omen Ra by Victor Pelevin. There's Men in Space by Tom McCarthy. There's The Book of Strange New Things by Michel Faber. And then there's perhaps the daddy of them all, which is Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. And sort of from an artistic point of view, space exploration, I mean, on the one hand, obviously you've got sort of science fiction genre, but it's a metaphor that's used quite a lot in literary fiction because it enables sort of metaphysical sort of exploration, sort of because time is so different in space and distance and scale and everything. It allows us to think beyond the human scale. So I think that's why it's quite often resorted to. So of those books I've mentioned, Michel Faber's book, The Book of Strange New Things, to me that's not science fiction. It's an inquiry into the pressures on a marriage by one of them going off into the far regions of space, about as far away as you can get from your wife. How can you preserve the ultimate in long-term relationships? And that's one of the themes in this book as well. Whereas the Stanislaw Lem is absolutely a science fiction genre book, but it's literary. It's the concept and the metaphysics of that book are fantastic. So, although in real life I'm not interested in space, with the sort of literary artistic head on it, I find it endlessly enticing. Sorry for that. I lost my train of thought because one of the beauties of this book is it's so diverse, the ideas that he packs into it. And one of the achievements of this book is there's not a wasted sentence in here, that he moves on between these different ideas, which I'll come to, different ways of thinking, different spheres, beautifully, smoothly, without any wastage. The transition is seamless, and that's one of the achievements of this book. But anyway, on to sort of give you an idea of what it's about to begin with. So a cloud has moved near Venus, and it's a purple cloud, and it is affecting the nighttime sky of Earth because of the way the sort of light is diffracted and everything. And we here on Earth can't be doing with that. We like our black night sky. So various sort of exploratory probes and things have been sent up to the cloud to try and discern what it is, and none of them have been successful. So the Earth realises, no, we're going to have to send a manned flight up there to physically get hold of some of this cloud and bring it back for examination. And while they're all sort of thinking about the ramifications of this, the Czech Republic sort of put their hand up and go, we'll do it, we'll take on the mission. And they've got a spaceman called Jakub with an unpronounceable Czech surname, who is a dust scientist. So he's the perfect guy for this mission, and he is a trained astronaut. So he goes up in a Czech space rocket, and for the Czech nation, this is them saying we have arrived finally on the world stage after sort of, you know, centuries of being battered around between other people's empires. You know, the Ottoman Empire, sorry, not the Ottoman Empire, the Habsburg Empire of Austria-Hungary, then the Nazi takeover in 38, and then Stalin's takeover and the crushing of the Prague Spring in 68. After this time, we've had the Velvet Revolution in the late 1980s. We assert ourselves as a state. We let Slovakia go its own way. You know, we were mature enough to do that, unlike the Yugoslavian example, which ended in a bloody civil war. And now the Czechs sort of feel confident enough to flex their muscles and go, we are going to make our name on the world map. We're going to do something for the world that no one else has done. So it's, for the Czech nation, it's very much sort of a heroic act that will put them amongst the sort of the demigods of other sort of nations who make significant contributions to humanity. And for the spaceman Jakub, it's also an heroic act in his mind. That's why he sort of accepted the mission, because as he was growing up as a child, the Velvet Revolution happened, and his parents, particularly his father, they were part of the old regime. His father was a communist informer and an interrogator, which means torturer. And with the coming of the Velvet Revolution, they find themselves on the wrong side of history. And they are going to be prosecuted for their activities under the old communist regime. But before they come to trial, they are killed in a cable car accident, which may or may not have been a sort of an assassination. I mean, that's not a big part of the book. We don't know, but I did wonder if they were bumped off. And what happens is that young Jakub, who has to leave his house in Prague, the family home, and is driven 2 hours away to his grandparents' farm in the countryside. And before he goes, you know, someone sort of, you know, gives him a bar of chocolate to, you know, blood sugar levels, you know, in his sort of, you know, shock and grief. And what you realise when he gets out of the car 2 hours later, he's still holding the empty wrapper, and it's a very beautiful, poignant, simple little image. And this book is full of little things like that. A similar thing happens at the death of his grandfather later in the book. But he goes to this farm where his grandparents live, and his grandfather explains is that in some books, which are sort of pro the old communist regime, then his father would be regarded as a hero. In other books, written after the Velvet Revolution and the regime change, his father is viewed as a monster, or would be a monster. And the grandfather says the trick is not to be a character or a figure in a book at all, which is the ideal state. But Jakub doesn't take that view. Jakub thinks the only way he can sort of solve or resolve the family tragedy is to do something heroic, and to drag them out of all the sort of bad odour that the family's held in, and sort of, you know, put them at the forefront of a sort of Czech society. So that seems to be his sort of primary motivation for going up in the rocket. So it's quite a long journey, being as it's space, and he has these weekly sort of video satellite calls with his wife, and their relationship is portrayed so tenderly before he goes. And but as the weeks wear on and these calls wear on, gradually they have less and less to say, and the passion's not there, and it's all got a bit dull. And then one week when he goes to for the video call, he's been thinking, you know, why has it been getting so dull? You know, we parted on slightly bad terms because the ritual breakfast of bacon that my wife always makes me, the day of the flight that I had to leave for the flight, I didn't eat it. I was too sort of het up and stuff. And he really wants to make amends. Sort of say, I'm sorry, you know, I was wrong to reject the food, and, you know, it's a symbol of our love and our stability. So he turns up for this video call, and she's not there. She's gone. The head of the mission control tells him she's left Prague. We don't know where she is. And Jakub's instant reaction is just a fantastic piece of writing. The name of the spaceship he's on is called the Jan Hus 1, and Jan Hus was basically the founder of Czech Protestantism, and he was martyred, as were so many of the early Protestants. So this is his reaction to hearing that his wife has gone missing. I plotted an apocalypse. Somehow I would turn Jan Hus 1 into a sentient meteorite, turn it around and drive it directly into the Earth. Somehow I would cut off the influence of physics over the shuttle, crash it through the atmosphere and set the planet ablaze. My charred body would come back to life, just so I could seek out Lenka. I would sit her down for a cup of coffee amid the end of civilization and ask her what it had felt like when she woke up one morning knowing she wanted out, whatever that meant. Love could turn us all into war criminals. I mean, that last line, love could turn us all into war criminals, is beautifully sort of illustrated by what precedes it, which is sort of part childish tantrum, part, physics, overcoming the physics of the course that the shuttle's on, and sort of, this sort of mad revenge where we'll sit among the ruins of civilization. Well, no, there will be no civilization because the Earth, you would have destroyed the Earth, so your wife ain't living anyway. But that's an astounding piece of writing. As I say, there's so much of that in this book. Ironically, he and the mission control guy, they resolve that they'll try and find out where she's gone, which means that they're going to place her under surveillance, which is of course a throwback to the old Czech regime of his communist father. That's the type of thing they would do, is they would put people under surveillance. So that's sort of quite funny. So that's one thread that's going on while he's on the space journey. Now another one is he has this sensation that he's not alone, and gradually he sort of tracks down the presence of sort of a giant black sort of spider-like being, and he finds that he can communicate with this being, or this being can communicate with him, because he has a sort of telepathy. And what is so clever is that there's lots of flashbacks to his childhood, to the tragedy of his parents, to his grandparents and the knock-on consequences of his parents being denounced for being communists, to how he met his wife. So there are all these flashbacks which normally, if they were just done as flashbacks, it wouldn't work. But what's so clever about this is that the creature, the space creature, he is sort of locked into Jakob's mind, and he is drawing out these memories. So he is in control of them, not Jakob. It's not Jakob summoning them up. It's this space creature as he tries to learn about Earthlings. And it's a very, very clever device. Again, it's this seamlessness that I so admired about this book. So the thing is, though, does this creature exist, or is it an hallucination of Jakob being alone in space? And that's never resolved, deliberately. That's for us to kind of figure out, because the creature occasionally lets lose part of its perspective. But it's mainly he's drawing out Jakob's thoughts. So is that sort of Jakob projecting his own things out? He's trying to work out, what's happened to his wife Lenka, why she left him, and why is he up in space exactly? What's all that about? Going back to his childhood, wanting to be a hero, all those sorts of things. He names this creature. I've forgotten it again. It's a name that won't stick with me, but it's the guy who invented and made the Prague's astrological clock, which I think is the only sort of still working one in the world. And this guy, the maker, was blinded by the authorities after he built it, so that he wouldn't be able to replicate it. It was exactly like sort of, the Pharaoh's pyramid builders were interred in the pyramids so that they could never reveal the location. It's that sort of cruelty out of, this sort of creative act, and it's, almost sort of, put down by blinding him. So they're near, the two of them are sort of companions on the flight up to this gas cloud, and eventually they reach it, but the gas cloud just sort of tears right through the spacecraft, and they're forced to abort and to basically abandon ship. And Jakob basically thinks, I'll just do a spacewalk into infinity. He's got his grandfather's ashes with him that he wants to bury in space. and he is which he does, and he thinks, well, I'm just going to have the same fate. But at the last minute, just as the oxygen is running out, and after his space spider companion has seemingly died, a Russian spaceship, picks him up, and he's in a terrible state, and he has to be in quarantine in case he's got any sort of space bacteria and that sort of thing. And there are 3 crew members of the Russian ship. There's a woman, a man who sort of basically ignores him, and then a third guy who he doesn't see because he's basically gone mad and has sort of locked out himself in one of the labs in the Russian ship. So he's really only talking to the woman, and they sort of form some sort of bond, and as she sort of nurses him back to some sort of level of health. But she tells him, you're a problem for us because officially this flight does not exist. It's a phantom Russian flight. Again, throw back to the sort of phantom missions and spies of the old Soviet Union. And there's 3 reasons why he can't, although he's going to be returned to Earth, he's going to be slung in a Russian prison, and his existence is going to be it's going to be denied that he survived. So back home in the Czech Republic, there's a massive mourning ceremony for him and a public, period of mourning, but they still regard him as a hero. So the first reason he can't go back is because the Russians won't let him, because it would acknowledge that their mission exists and it cannot be acknowledged. The second reason he can't go back is because he's dead, or everyone thinks he's dead. So how would he cope? How would society cope with this? And the Czech, it'd sort of humiliate the Czech Republic if they had to admit that actually they got it wrong, and he had, not only had he lived, but they weren't responsible for bringing him back, somebody else was. And the third reason, this is where it gets really interesting on a metaphysical level, is when he was out in space with the space spider, they got a glimpse of the start of the universe, because that's what sort of, space dust still exists from that time and stuff. And the space spider, in a way, he learns is I'll come back to that. But if he is effectively saved by this miracle, the ship that shouldn't have been there, what are the odds of the ship being in the exact right quadrant? There is a reason for that, which I'll come to. If this is a miracle, is he in fact a god? He's seen the beginnings of the universe. He's defied death. He's he's going to come back. So there's all these sort of inflation of his own being that he's sort of touching. Eventually, he's well enough to go and secretly visit the third Russian astronaut, who he was forbidden to visit. And this third Russian astronaut may also have been visited by the space spider, but the space spider deemed this Russian astronaut not worthy of sort of contact that he could learn stuff from, which is why he then moved to Jakub. But that he's left the Russian cosmonaut believing that Jakub is the prophet that the space spider told him would come. So again, he is the Messiah. He is a god in the eyes of this Russian cosmonaut. And the cosmonaut reveals that the reason the Russian ship was able to pick him up, is because the space spider had visited him one last time, having abandoned him, saying, you need to get your ship here and you need to pick up this guy who's out in space. And then the space spider returned to be by Jakub's side, and the space spider himself died. But this Russian cosmonaut is completely mad, and when the other 2 Russian cosmonauts realised that Jakub's paid him a visit, they said, well, the reason that he's here in the first place, this third Russian, is because it was an experiment that the Russians wanted to conduct of insanity in space, and this guy was the case study. You can't trust whatever he says, etc., etc., and you're never to visit him again. So as the Russian ship is returning to Earth, it looks pretty bleak for Jakub, because he's going to be sort of he's not going to exist from here in on. Anyway, he manages to sort of escape his captors once back on Earth. I won't sort of go into that. And it's at this point that the book changes, because up till now you've bounced around in time because of the way of the space spider taking the memories, so that you've gone back to the time of his childhood, or you've gone back to when he first met his wife. But from here in on, it's a strict linear progression, because there's no sort of magical manipulation of time. We're back on human Earth with the human logic of time and flow and all of that sort of stuff. So obviously the first thing he thinks is, I need to I need to go and visit my wife. I need to make up for what's happened. He's learnt. He gets to learn that in as much as he was having sort of psychological support as a lone astronaut, she too was having psychological support from the same therapist, expressing what it was like from her side. And he reads the notes and he realises that she is not, while he is Odysseus going off to fight the Trojan War, she is not prepared to be Penelope staying at home, and she goes off to be her own person. So she's not being unfaithful. She hasn't met anybody else. She's living on her own, and he sort of gets all this information and he tracks her down and he watches her from afar. Doesn't his the effects of space and nearly dying and all that have so sort of thinned him out, and he looks terrible, so that he's not actually recognisable. So he watches her from afar and he realises that he cannot go over and talk to her, that he has to remain dead to her because she has made her a new life, even though it's not with anybody else. He's had to let her go. That is the true act of love. And that whole interaction between them throughout the novel is why it's very similar to Michel Faber's The Book of Strange New Things, which is a look at the effects of how can you say you're committed to a relationship when you go to the other side of the universe? Same in Michel Faber's as in here. And it's both are brilliant treatments of the subject. And obviously the sort of spider space creature that may or may not be hallucinogenic, that sort of echoes Solaris. So some of the sources are quite clear in here, but I think he takes them on into his own genuine work. This is not derivative. This is fresh. So after he resolves that he's not going to make contact with his wife, he goes back to the only person he's revealed himself to is the mission controller, who's since retired from that job. And the mission controller is shocked by the physical state that he's in, and says, you've got to you've got to recover properly. You've got to go to a spa, which is an interesting thing because there was a lot of sort of interwar fiction, European fiction by the likes of Thomas Mann and that, which was set in these health spas that people really believed could cure things like tuberculosis. I think Kafka went to one for his TB. So there's quite a long section of the book where he's on his own again in a spa, and there's quite a lot of interesting stuff happens there as well. Gradually, when he's sort of finished in the spa and he's sort of recovered to as full health as he's going to be, there's been another thread, which is the last piece of the jigsaw to get resolved in the novel, and that's when he was living with his grandparents as a child. A man comes to visit who is very menacing, who basically says, Jakob's father, the grandparents' son, tortured him in interrogation. And he has this sort of metal boot that he sort of plops on the table. He says, this is the boot, one of the boots they put on me to run the electrical charge through. And to Jakob, he's only ever known as the shoe man. And basically, he and his grandparents are kicked out of their farm, the family farm that they've had for generations, because this guy is now on the winning side and sort of puts pressure on them by sort of painting graffiti on their front gate, sort of saying communist collaborator, so that the locals in the village take against them because they've shifted allegiances from the old communist regime to the new democracy. And they hound the family out, basically, which is exactly what this guy wanted. And then he basically seizes their house as reparations for the the atrocities wrought upon him. And this is a great injustice. He presents it as an injustice to him for being tortured, but to Jakob this is a great injustice because his grandparents had nothing to do with it. And yet the sort of sins of the fathers visited not only on the children, i.e. on Jakob, but on the grandparents, on the parents, and that's a sort of shocking realization. So the last bit of the book is he wants he wants to resolve the situation with the shoe man. And that's sort of the last bit of the book. And they have their interaction. I'm not going to spoil it for you, how that's resolved. And after that, he's got no agenda left. You know, all the stray threads, even if they haven't had successful resolution, like with his wife, but he has visited them and addressed them. So he goes back to the old family home because the shoe man didn't really want it, just let it rot. And he basically he takes up residence there. No one recognises him, so he's able to be anonymous and stuff. But what you realise is that despite his wish to be a hero, actually he settled for not appearing in anyone's books at all. Although, of course, ironically, he's in this book. So that he has, he doesn't reach for the stars in terms of status in the end. That Jakob is dead, died in space. This new Jakob accepts the complete anonymity. He's not on one side or the other. He's not on the side of democracy. He's not on the side of the, of the fallen communist regime. He just lives out his life in quietude. And that journey from the sort of, this yearning to be a hero for the wrong reasons in many ways, to the grandfather's wisdom, the apotheosis of the grandfather's wisdom is, no, you don't want to be in a book as a hero or a monster because they're always changing from one to the other. And while you're a hero, it's great, but when you're a monster, it's terrible. So it's better not to be in at all. And that's the sort of realisation that he realises in the end. And it's a beautifully simple and profound sort of journey to get to that point. This is just a fabulous, fabulous book. I'm just going to read a couple of bits to give you an idea of the style or the language or whatever. So until we had space exploration, human beings created these sort of mythical places like hell. Dante's description of hell or whoever's description of hell. But of course with space exploration and cameras and satellite telescopes and all of this sort of stuff, now we know we don't have to create these mystical things because they've always been there, just we weren't able to reach them. So when he's coming back in the Russian spacecraft back through the Earth's atmosphere, it basically sort of says, this is Dante's hell. The actual physical reality, the terrible pressures on the body in the spacecraft. This really is hell. For 130 kilometres we fell. The Mesosphere, the protector. The stratosphere, eerie, calm, stable and dry. The place without climate. A purgatory occupying the properties of space and yet a part of Earth. A deceptive non-world, a no man's land between the trenches. Then the Troposphere, the last line of defence from the Greek tropos signifying change. The keeper of the world's water vapours and aerosols. A place of chaos, rising pressures, weather patterns. Perfect as the layer closest to human contact. Humanity summarised in a single sphere. The earth rested. And again, it's just fantastic writing that has many resonances. As I say, it sort of, invokes Dante and all this sort of creative, juices of the human race over many centuries. And he's just realigned it for, well, okay, in the 21st century, how about conceiving it as this? It was there all the time, although we couldn't possibly have known that back in the day. And then finally, so as part of his decision to say, I'm not going to be a hero anymore, it's the effect of being in space. So when you read the reports of people who actually been out in space, because it just changes the whole perception. When you're in a spacecraft or you're on the moon and you're looking back at you're the only people who've seen the whole of the Earth, the whole of the world, and it changes your perception. It changes notions of scale and things. So this is part of his, informs his thinking as to why he's not going to be a hero. Stars did not seem the same anymore. To me, they did not invite fantasies, did not symbolise aspiration, did not arouse curiosity. They were dead images of things for which I had no use. And that's the final word. It sort of comes back to what I said at the beginning, that in literature, space represents all these sort of metaphysical possibilities. And he's going, well, I've seen them and nah, it's dead for me now. And again, just another little profound insight. You know, this is a fantastic book. As I say, not one sentence wasted. Lots of profound insights into man. Lots of wonderful little bits of writing, which I hope I've illustrated with the bits I've read out. And you know, I just can't stress how much I enjoyed this book, and vindicated my decision to buy it 8 months early, even though I couldn't remember what lay behind that decision. So, The Spaceman of Bohemia by Jaroslav Kalfar, utterly recommended, even if you're not into science fiction. The science fiction part of this is not overburdening like it is in The Martian. You know, if you're not into science fiction, you may not like The Martian. But this has so much more to recommend it. So till next time, thanks very much.